everybody, welcome back to my channel. And I am delighted to welcome Dan Malsch, who is a mixer. And Dan, you very kindly reached out to me on Instagram because you've worked with Ghost, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. And you were very kind to say that you'd seen me in action on Gulbanger's
Yeah.
Ball and how much you enjoyed it and everything. And that meant so much to me. So I'm really glad that we got to talk now on this call and, find out a little bit about your work and what it was like working with Ghost, because that's our kind of shared ground. But you've
It
also
is.
worked with Avenged Sevenfold, Bowling for Soup, Gajira, and I think you've just recently worked with Castle Rats. So you've got
Yes,
a
I did.
wonderful group of bands to work with there. I'm just curious to take you back to the beginning. How did you end up being a mixer? What exactly does it entail?
Well, it's a long story, and thank you for having me. It's great to talk to you. I've been a fan of yours for a while, all the way back from old MTV days, which was great. Yeah, how did I become a mixer? Oof, I'll try to give you the short, long story. Um, my older brothers were in a metal band back in the '80s, and they would rehearse in my garage, my parents' garage, not my garage. And I would sneak around and watch them all the time. They would always kick me out because I was so much younger, and who knows what they were doing in the garage that they didn't want me to see. Um, but I would go after the band. If they'd go to work, the guys, I would go and mess with all their equipment, and I would take the mixer apart. And as a young kid, like 10 and 12 years old, I was always much more, I guess, infatuated with the technical side of things. And, they would obviously yell at me when they got back because why is this like this and why is this not working? But I would take their sound equipment apart and try to figure out why is this piece of equipment doing this. And so I was very, very interested with the technical side very early on. And then I was in bands throughout the '90s, and luckily we got to record in some big studios in Germany and Florida and California and and I was much more interested in the technical side, looking at the mixing board, and sometimes it would annoy the band a little bit, but that's kind of how I got into it.
Amazing. So, just
Yeah.
kind of 101 again, what is the difference between a record producer and a mixer? And is there a fair bit of crossover between the two? Do some producers do their own mixes? Or is it better to have a kind of outside person that's got a completely separate perspective?
It's interesting because a bunch of times I do both. Like I've just finished a band Bowling for Soup's new record, and I co-produced and mixed that record. Um, but I also just did the new Fuel record that's not out yet, and I didn't end up mixing that record because I was a little too inside of that album as the co-producer. Um, I couldn't separate myself enough from what I had achieved as a producer and engineer. I think the band wanted the record to be a little heavier than I wanted, and I wanted to try to keep it a little more organic, like the original Fuel records. So we actually handed that off to a mixer, Joel Wanasek. But most of the time, if I produce an album, I'm mixing it. Um, if you find the right mixing engineer to work with you, it's great to be able to pass it off and have a second set of ears. But sometimes that could also be a disaster. So you have to. It's all so these days with Pro Tools and digital, it's all so intertwined. You're kind of mixing as you go. It's a very different than back in the old tape days. We're mixing as we go. Where the production is the mix these days. So if
Mm.
you have a bad production, will never get a good mix. That's always some of the issue. Not to jump around a lot, but I'll get mixes. Bands will send me mixes sometimes, and they'll say, "Oh, we want this mix to sound like a Ghost record or an Avenged Sevenfold record," and the production is not nearly as quality, I should say,
Mhm.
as that sometimes. So it's production that has so much to do with the mix. If you have a bad production, you're going to have maybe I can get a mediocre mix, but if you have a great production, I can do everything I can just not to mess it up and try to just make it a little bit better. So it's really all intertwined.
I understand. Because
Yeah.
you originally started out like me in an analog world, where we
Sure.
were doing everything in an analog format with tapes, and stuff like that. Now it's gone into the digital format. Obviously, it's so much easier. You can do file sharing and you can work remotely from other people and all that is it good stuff, maybe efficient stuff, not necessarily good. But do you in any way miss the old analog days, or do you feel that digital is the best way to create the most the best sounding work?
In a lot of ways, I absolutely miss the old days
Hmm.
because I'll give you a few reasons. For one, you had most of the time you'd have a 24 track in the studio, a 24 track analog tape machine. So you had to make decisions. And making decisions is a good thing. You know,
Hmm.
you had to make sure what you were putting on tape was the quality that you wanted. And you didn't have this 500 tracks to let's try this, let's try this. This is kind of good. Let's just throw it down. Maybe we'll use it, maybe we won't. That kind of stuff I don't like. I love back in the day being able to do pre-production with a band in a little rehearsal studio, having a little 4 track tape recorder, because if it's going to sound good on that, it's going to sound great when you get in the studio. Now, a lot of times, unfortunately, there's not a lot of pre-production. If I'm producing a band, I try to insist on it if possible, but a lot of the bands I'm working with are touring a lot and they're all in different states, so sometimes that's not possible. But I miss a lot of the limitations of tape, of 24 track tape, because a lot of bands now, records I work on this, they're sometimes 500 tracks. And I spend so much time just sorting through. You're almost becoming a producer at that time because, oh, that doesn't work. I have to mute that. This doesn't work. There's just so many options. There's so many things you could do. Now, editing is great. The fast editing is great because I remember back in the day recording records, and our producer, we had a great producer back in the day. His name was Jim Morris. He did a lot of the really like death metal bands like Cannibal Corpse and Gore Guts and all those kind of really heavy, heavy death metal bands. But the band that I was in, we always had like a lot of vocal harmonies and backing vocals and all these kind of like a Queensryche thing, like, you know.
One of my favorite bands.
And yeah, I love Queensryche. And if we had to fly vocals, say we had this big like backing vocal stack, and we weren't going to try to sing that again because we just got by to be able to get the vocal stack. So our producer would say, "Hey, I'm going to fly these vocals into each chorus. Come back in about an hour or two."
Hmm.
Now, if it takes you longer than 2 minutes, the band behind you is looking at you like you're, not doing your job properly. So the editing I like, but I don't like the option. Too many options is not a lot of fun to me.
No, it sounds like for analog, it was more, you had to be more disciplined, but also
Hmm.
perhaps you captured more spontaneous
Yeah.
takes, I'm guessing, because you had to be more disciplined. Well, it's fascinating. Now, let's move on to our shared ground, which is the amazing band Ghost. You mixed the Billboard #1 album, Skeleta. But
Yes.
you'd previously worked with Ghost on an earlier recording, hadn't you?
Yes. Impera. Yeah, I
Compare, yeah.
started working along with, I should always include, along with mixer Andy Wallace.
Hmm.
Andy Wallace has been working with Ghost, I think every album, maybe. I think maybe one Tom Dalgetty did alone, which was with Square Hammer. That was amazing, amazing record. Um, but yeah, I started working the first album I worked on with Ghost was Impera. But after Impera, I did go back and mix the entire Ghost catalog in Atmos. So I've had my hand on every Ghost song except um, what's Ghosts? What's Ghost's biggest hit? One of the
Oh,
older
Mary on a
songs.
Cross.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, that's the only one that I didn't get to have my hands on. I love
Mhm.
that song. But
Awesome.
yeah, so Skeletor was an interesting album with Ghost because Andy and I originally started mixing the record in Pennsylvania, at my studio in Pennsylvania. But Tobias and the other producers couldn't be in the studio at the time. Tobias was really busy doing a bunch of things. One of the producers was in Nashville. the other producer, Vincent, was stuck on another record, so it was a lot of back and forth, more so than online, more so than we would have wanted. And with the time differences, it was very weird. So we all thought the album was done in the summer of, it would have been the summer of 25, would it? 24 or 25? Can't remember now. But we all thought the album was done. It was going to be pressed. It was actually a test pressing of vinyl. And then I got a call from Tobias's manager, Kristen, I think maybe it was before Christmas. It was starting to get cold. I know that because I ended up going to Stockholm and it was very cold. Sorry, I'm a little bad. I'm pretty bad with dates. And Kristen had said, "Oh, we want you to. Can you come to Stockholm and do a couple tweaks on the record?" That turned into being in the studio with Tobias for almost 3 weeks, which was amazing. I love Tobias, but we pretty much redid the whole album.
Amazing. But what was it like actually working with him kind of sat next to you in Stockholm?
Tobias is the warm. He's very warm. He's the first because we had talked on the phone, FaceTime calls. First time I met him was at a studio IMRSV in Stockholm. He came in, gave me a big hug. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And Tobias is really great at reading people. Tobias is, that he's very smart, very intelligent. I was coming into a studio that I'd never worked in before. A little bit of jet lag, new console I'd never worked on before. Just very, very foreign place to work in for me. And Tobias was just watching me a little bit, and he said, I'm going to come back tomorrow. I'll come back tomorrow. I'll let you get sorted out a little bit. And then he was just giving me space. He was giving me time he wasn't going to stand right over me and watch me struggling to get, the mixes to where they were and figuring out the studio. And I remember him calling me the next morning. He's like, "How you doing? How's everything working out?" I'm like, "I think it's going good." And I think he felt in my voice that I still wasn't ready for Tobias to be in the studio. He's like, I'll come tomorrow. And granted, these studios are very expensive. This was not an inexpensive room to be in. So it was a blessing and a pleasure to work with Tobias. He knows exactly what he wants, but he also trusts, he trusts your opinion if he's working with you. And Tobias is very hands-on. It's like, I need it to be a certain way. I need the bass to go boom, 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 boom. He's very, animated in the studio. I'd say 10 out of 10 working with Tobias. It was a little intimidating at first because he's sitting right behind me. And, one of the greatest mixers in the world, Andy Wallace, had worked on the previous mixes with me. So I'm there, I don't want to say to improve, but to get to what Tobias's vision was with the record.
Obviously, Tobias, he's a multi-instrumentalist, songwriter. He has such vision. Was there any qualities that you felt about him that made him really stand out to you, having worked with many other artists, but also perhaps things where you look at somebody or you work with somebody and you think, I know why that person has got where they've got?
Tobias, I get the impression, and you were on tour, Tobias, so Tobias does not settle for. I think Tobias would probably spend an unlimited budget to make his vision how he wants it to be. I think the art is the most important thing for Tobias, which really is amazing at that level. There's no phoning it in. I think it's good enough. It's a lot of pressure working with Tobias because he knows how he wants things, and he'll go above and beyond to make his vision to get to where his vision is. I think the guys in Avenged Sevenfold are very much like that. I think when you get to that level, when you're in a room with Tobias or Matt from Avenged Sevenfold, you understand why they got to where they are. There's levels, and I'm not saying there aren't people that are as talented. There are, but
Mm,
to have that whole package of the, perseverance and persistence and vision and putting in the work. I mean, sometimes Tobias and I were in the studio till 3 or 4 in the morning,
hmm
and I would start at 9 a.m. and he would stay there the whole time. He wasn't, you know, he wasn't. He was just there. He was in the studio, and
mm,
sometimes you think, oh, I mean, I think people would think sometimes who aren't in the business that we'd be sipping champagne and eating lobster, and no, we were eating quickly and trying to make the record as good as it could possibly be. So,
mhm,
yeah, the bands at that level, there's a quality. It's hard to
mm,
explain. Yeah, I'm
mm,
sure you agree.
mm. No, no, I have. I saw it when I worked with Tobias. I saw it when I worked with Madonna.
Yeah.
I could see. I could see very clearly how they had achieved what they had achieved. With regards to the Skeleta album, was there any particular challenges for you? I don't know whether you were asked to achieve a specific sound, or maybe, I don't know, the cowbell. That's a little bit of an unusual instrument to work with. Then you had that incredible choral intro into Peacefield. Were there any little things that kind of tested you a little bit?
I would have to say a lot of it.
Hmm
So I think Ghost sometimes, if you notice, Skeleta's a very clean record.
Mm,
It's Ghost is a heavy metal band or a hard rock band, a heavy metal band, but their productions are much different than say a Gojira. Gojira is a little more, aggressive and kind of raw sounding. Ghost is very polished.
hmm
And there's a lot going on in a Ghost record. There's lots of keyboards, there's lots of little guitars coming in and out, lots of vocal harmonies. And Tobias wants clarity. I think that's a Swedish thing. I mean, bands like ABBA,
hmm
it's perfection. So yeah, there were a lot of challenges, and cowbell was one. The cowbell is loud. What's the name of the song with the cowbell? I'm
It
sure.
was Umbra.
Yeah, that is loud. And the cowbell almost could not be loud enough on that song. But
So was it a case of turn it up to 11?
oh, 12. Yeah, because every time I would think it was loud enough, because I know Tobias originally wanted to come out with the cowbell. So I remember him actually talking about that in the studio. And one other thing, not to get too technical about the record, the cymbals are very loud and very bright. So to try to have that it be as loud and as bright as, and it wasn't only Tobias, it was the producers also. It's tough because sometimes if you make cymbals real bright and really loud, it can get a little harsh. So there are a lot of challenges on that record. I definitely had a couple anxiety attacks, um, maybe more than a couple, on that record. But a lot of challenges. But I'm super happy with it because I think it's a very different sounding album too.
What would you say you are most proud of with regards to your work on Skeleta?
I think the song Lacrima,
Hmm
because it's got this kind of 80s. One second, I'm gonna get a little technical. It's got this 80s like Rockman guitar that it starts out with this real thin guitar, and it actually goes throughout the song, and it's a balance of trying to make the guitars too thin and like rocky enough for a rock song. But I think we achieved that, and also how big the chorus has become with all the
hmm
backing vocals and the clarity of the album. Uh, I talk about that album a lot. People probably get sick of it sometimes but it was really, I think it's one of those albums that is going to stand the test of time for a long time. I think sonically, I think songwriting, I think it's such a polished. I have a hard time sometimes calling Ghost a metal band, but that's a very polished album. I mean, they're definitely a metal band, but they're not brutal. They're very polished. I sometimes say ABBA with distortion on the guitar. It's a little, it's not like that, but that quality, that vocal quality.
Just to, I guess, wind this up, Dan, you actually came out onto the Skeleta and saw the show in New York. Just curious what you thought of how it came across live. And did you and Tobias ever discuss what the songs might sound like live? Was that ever a factor in your production?
Yeah, absolutely. Tobias and I had a few conversations about stadium sound, big reverbs, just all about filling a stadium, anthemic songs. And I saw the band at MSG, and I also saw you. I wanted to talk to you a little bit quickly about all the work you were doing because I would be watching you on your updates throughout the Skeleta tour, if you don't mind.
No, please.
I just want to ask you a couple questions. That was a lot of work. You did such a good job. You traveled with the band the whole time.
Mhm.
I was actually watching you, not to sound like a weirdo or anything, but I was watching you, with the crowd and the audience, and it was great. You did such a good job. I think it was perfect for the band to have you being their kind of spokesperson. I think.
Well, thank you
But
so
what was your
much.
experience like? I mean, how did you love it?
I loved every second of it
Good.
from the moment I arrived on the tour till the last show where I was bawling my eyes out because I was so sad it was
Oh,
over. No, I just loved every second of it. It was just an honor and a privilege. And I loved meeting the fans and hearing their stories and seeing their creativity and their courage because so many people there had found such solace in Ghost's music,
yeah, yeah.
and that it spoke to them during a difficult time and helped them through. And that is something that Tobias, I believe he should be very, very proud of the fact that his music has provided solace to people in difficult times, but also the community that has built up around Ghost. It's so inclusive, it's so joyful, it's so loving, it's so creative. You would have seen it
It's
all when you
amazing.
were on the
Yeah,
tour. So yeah, I mean, it was just the happiest of times. And I'm sad it's over, but
yeah.
by the same token, I'm extremely grateful that I had the chance to experience it and see 70 shows and just be in the thick of it with the fans.
Yeah, it is sad that it's over. I mean, hopefully it's not over for too long. But I know Tobias really wanted a break. And I think he needed a break. I mean, he's a hard worker. He's just, and having that level of, you know, perfection in a show. And speaking of the show, because you asked me about the
I
show,
did. Hmm.
it was amazing. In the beginning of the show, I was sitting. I was with my wife and Besma, who was one of the assistant engineers on the album. She flew all the way in from Stockholm to come to MSG. Well, she spent the week in the studio with me too, but I thought it was interesting how the show opened because the show opened smaller and it just kept building and
Mm.
building and building. And by you didn't lose because sometimes it shows it starts too big. You're like, oh, it can't get any bigger. It kept your attention the whole time. My wife was actually standing the whole time watching the show because it just kept bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. It's an amazing show. I think it's one of the best shows I've ever been to.
It really was a truly immersive experience because there weren't any phones. And
Yeah,
everybody was just like, in the moment. And we talked a little bit about you being earlier in the analog era, that's what it was like back in the day of,
yeah,
all the great bands that really started the whole golden era of metal, as I call it, Metallica, Def Leppard, Sepultura, all of those kind of bands. We didn't have phones back in those days, and it was an immersive experience. And because nobody had a phone, it was much more sociable because everybody was
yeah,
talking to each other and engaging with each other prior to the show.
yeah,
So again, I think Tobias has led the way in phone-free shows. It was previously really in the domain of comedians where they didn't want phones in their stand-up shows. But I think a lot of bands are taking a leaf out of Ghost's book now and are going to ban phones. And I can only think it's a positive thing ultimately.
you go to some shows these days. and everyone's looking at their phone, or videoing it the whole time. You're looking at you're looking at the show through your phone. It's a strange thing. It's a strange thing, but I absolutely loved it. It was really great.
So if I could ask you for one standout memory from when you mixed the Skeleta album, could you pinpoint one thing where you thought, wow, that's incredible, or wow, I've had an epiphany, I've really learned something. Is there anything you can think of?
Yes, yes. So the first song I had remixed was Satanized, and obviously because the original mixes were very good. And Tobias was standing behind me listening to mix. And you know when someone's standing behind you listening to something or
No
looking at your
pressure.
work? This is the worst thing in the world. This is terrible. I'm the worst mixer ever. That's me. I mean, I am not, you know, I'm pretty hard on myself. So I'm probably lost about 20 pounds sweating while Tobias was behind me listening to the song. So I stop, Satanized, and Tobias looks at me and he goes, can we do them all like that? I'm like, well, because we originally had 10 days. I forgot to say that. 10 days turned into 3 weeks. So I was ready to get kicked out of the studio after he listened to Satanized. But he just turned around and looked at me. He's like, can we do them all like that? I was like, okay. So I took a nice deep breath and then, because you
So
never know.
you'd found that little sweet spot, that little kind of
Yes.
formula that had aligned with what he was looking for.
Yeah. And once again, not to get too technical, but there was something about the first mix that was really bothering Tobias, and he couldn't pinpoint it because he wasn't in the same room. But
Hmm.
once we were in the same room, he's like, "What is that?" And I
Hmm.
showed him. He's like, "Oh, get rid of that," So then we carried on from there. So
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me, Dan. It's been so interesting talking to you, and I could talk for eons more, but we're
yeah,
running out of time now. So just want to say thank you for your work on Skeleta. I know the fans love the record and really appreciate you as much as I do. Thank you for joining me on my channel, and I wish you all the best for the future. And who knows, maybe our paths will cross somewhere down the rock and roll trail.
we have to. And thank you so much. I'm a big fan. I love what you do, and I love what you did on the Skeletor tour. So thank you so much for talking with me.
I've really enjoyed our conversation. It's been
Great,
fascinating. Thank you so
great.
much. You take
Yeah,
care.
I'm
All the
sure I'll see
best.
you again. Bye bye.